Hey Dean. So when you were gone, we did an episode I did an episode, not you. You were in Hawaii. I did an episode with John Birmingham about summer camp, and it was a pretty wild episode. Definitely weird. I don't think we talked about communism even once, so that was wild. Anyways, it just got some really good feedback on Twitter and on Facebook. I saw 2 different posts about it this week, and I was really excited that the work that I did with John without you was actually good. It was kind of affirming.
Yeah, so, just send me the paycheck and I'll stay away.
Yeah, right. Anyways, I've never met him, but everyone I talk to about him always says really good things, so I guess I trust his judgment. Carl Aho, do you know him?
I also know him through the internet. I know him through Kierkegaard stuff in particular.
That's right.
Yeah, extremely nice person. Also from Michigan, apparently, so that's cool.
Yeah. John Birmingham knows him, and so does John Heaps and some other people I know all know him. So he's a well-known person in Christian academic circles. Anyways, he said some very positive things about episode 14, Camping Out with John Birmingham, and I want to reiterate that those things are true, and it's a good episode. So you should go listen to it. We didn't have any new reviews on iTunes, but that was like a very stunning and good review on the social medias. So there you go.
Yeah, there you go. That's too bad. Please send us more reviews because that's my favorite part of the podcast. Reading them.
Literally, we can't do an intro unless you guys send us reviews. So
yeah, look at us right now. This is what you're forced to listen to.
Make like a second iTunes account. Make another comment. Make a fake name. I don't know.
Get your parents to do it. Be like, don't listen to it. Just do it.
Yeah. Yeah, good idea. Get your parents to do it. They'll really like it. I think it's definitely good for the sort of church mom and dad crowd.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Okay, cool. Well, Dean, do you want to explain who's on the podcast today?
Yeah, so this week we've got Daniel Camacho, a really great guy. If you don't know him, you should. He writes at a lot of different places, but more specifically now he's writing at The Guardian. I guess he's got a regular gig there, which is great for him, but also great for The Guardian. They're investing in a good young writer. Anyway, Daniel's a Duke Divinity grad, and he's spent a lot of time thinking and writing about all the things we care about on this podcast, race and class and religion and what we should do about all those things and more. Yeah, good guy all around. And we've been hoping to have him on for a long time. So it's cool that it finally panned out.
Yeah, I'm super psyched. If you guys want, you can also follow him on Twitter at Daniel J. Camacho and tweet all your good thoughts about him and all the smart things he said. So there you go.
All right, so let's start off just catching up a little bit. Daniel, what have you been up to? You kind of already were sharing with us a little bit before we started recording, but we'll make you say it again for people who weren't there. Everyone.
Thanks. Well, first, thank you for having me on Magnificast. I think it's a great name for a podcast. I'm a huge fan of Mary's song, her leftist anthem about God opposing the wealthy and siding with the poor. But I've been through a lot of major transitions recently. Got married in May. Also graduated from Duke Divinity School, and I moved back to Long Island, New York, which is where I'm originally from. And so, yeah, a lot sort of going on in terms of transition. I left Duke Divinity School kind of at a very interesting time. We were being profiled by the New York Times just as I left because of a controversy. You may have heard about it, about like one of our professors and a racial equity training thing. And I can tell you more later if you want to know. But yeah, so I just finished divinity school, and now I'm trying to sort of take some of the extra time that I have to write more about the topics that I care about. And I'm really thankful the Guardian just gave me a 1-year contract to be a contributing opinion writer for them. So I'll try to make the most of it in this next year to write, to cover some things. And so, so I'm excited to continue to write on these things.
That's very cool. I'm excited to see where the rest of your writing goes. I've been reading the columns that you've been doing at The Guardian, and they've been super fun so far. So, yeah, I feel like it's cool to cover that weird beat between religion and politics in the U.S. right now. And, yeah, I don't know. It's impressive that it seems like they're trying to find people who are obviously capable of saying something cool about that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Matt, what have you been up to?
Man, like my summer's basically over. I had like all these research projects planned, but now I'm just I have to prep for class because it's like time. I've been setting up this class. I've mentioned it before in the podcast. It's like the capstone project for seniors at my school, and it's like an interdisciplinary research project. And this year the topic is mass incarceration. So I've been like setting up the syllabus and trying to think through some assignments to get them going on that. I just got my copy of the new Jim Crow all wet with a LaCroix, so that's stupid, and I have to fix that. But yeah, so they're reading New Jim Crow, some other like critical essays, Angela Davis, Our Prison's Obsolete, and some other stuff. I don't know. I'm really excited about it, though. It's been an all-consuming thing in my life for the last, like, 48 hours. I've been planning the syllabus, so it's been a lot of headspace on that. Yeah, what have you been doing, Dean?
That's cool. I am still coming down from the old vacation high, I feel like. So, yeah, I took this 2-week vacation, and then now I've been back in real life for a week, and, yeah, I don't know, man. I'm like 2 weeks behind on everything still, a week later, which is not my favorite place to be. I have like a bunch of articles I need to be writing and things I should be editing, and that's not great. And yeah, I don't know. But that being said, so my brother, who I visited in Hawaii, they're 5 hours behind. And his friend has been like prank calling me in the middle of the night, which is very funny because he's this like 57-year-old man who just hangs out and like surfs all day. So that's been, brightening my day, I guess, getting these these calls in the middle of the night from like this 57-year-old guy pretending to be a young lady looking for Dean Della. So yeah, little bright spots, I guess. So that's cool.
Yeah, that sounds great. I guess.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. I wish that like all humans. I wish that I didn't have to work for money or whatever, but I do. And I'm trying not to get stuck in like the vortex that is, being on vacation and feeling like I should never work again. So, warding off those revolutionary impulses are very, very hard right now.
Yeah, man, that's hard.
Waiting for the fully automated luxury communism to kick in.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah, with vacations all the time, just always on vacation.
That sounds like a very good system. I would like to sign up for that as soon as possible.
Yeah, bring it up at your next DSA meeting.
Yeah, they're like
yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so last week on the podcast, we had this conversation with Drew Ventland about the Socialism 2017 conference in Chicago. And I don't know if you were familiar with that at all, Daniel. We weren't until we saw it on the internet and then talked to Drew about it. But it got us thinking about, I don't know, taking stock of what Christianity in America is up to in 2017. So you've been writing a lot about that, Daniel, American Christianity in the last year or so, and what's going on with it, what's not going on with it. And yeah, we figured we'd chat with you a little bit about it. So there are a few columns that I'd like to talk to you about, but I figured we might as well talk about the one that you just wrote that came out a couple days ago about Donald Trump and white evangelicalism. Yeah, maybe for people who haven't read it, could you just give us like an elevator pitch of what you were after in the article?
Sure, yeah. So with the recent piece that I wrote, it was actually sparked by a picture that was circulating in which Donald Trump is surrounded by a prayer circle in the Oval Office. And this was, it caused quite a stir because basically this is happening simultaneously while Republicans are trying to cut Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. and all of their proposals are basically horrible. Going to hurt working class people, going to leave millions of people uninsured, and then you have here a group of evangelical leaders that are praying for Donald Trump. At least that's sort of how it came across. And so I decided to kind of cover that. There was even a press conference where Huckabee was saying that Donald Trump prays all the time, that this is sort of a regular occurrence. He has a group that he meets with every week. And to be fair, that's something that Obama did before as well, I think. So, but the controversy actually has to do with how much Trump has really anchored himself with the evangelical support. Even though it is completely clear that Donald Trump has no sort of very genuine faith, very little sincere faith or morality in general, and so, but still, he got 80%, 80 to 81% of the evangelical vote. And of all the groups, and these are, I keep reading the polls that come out from Pew Research that show sort of where his approval ratings are amongst different religious groups, and white evangelicals specifically are usually always the highest in terms of continuing to support and approve of his presidency. So I was covering that and basically trying to understand or trying to articulate, why is it that this shouldn't be a surprise, that this is where evangelicalism, at least a large swath of it, has led to. And I think if we look back, I don't think it's a surprise, actually.
Cool. Well, that gives us a good place to get started, I think. Well, maybe we can just start talking about like what evangelicalism is at its base. Like whenever I think of evangelicalism, I think of things like the moral majority. But what that means, or like how that plays out, at least, it seems like it's sort of like a politics of resentment. It's about like, like hating the right people, making sure they don't win, and like still appealing to some kind of like vague moral principle. So I don't know what's like at the base of those types of evangelical politics.
Yeah, what's striking about that specific point about even the language of moral majority and how that was sort of one of the first groups to really spearhead the religious right, the rise of the religious right, to sort of try to line that up, this idea of this Christian right representing kind of good morality, a support for all life, trying to line that up and make that connect with Trump and his policies and his personal life. There's a huge disconnect. And I think that's what people are starting to see more and more, or people are noticing. I think that disconnect has always existed in the sense that this politics of pro-life has always been very shallow because it's latched onto certain cultural issues like abortion, but has really neglected or supported what I would consider to be very regressive approaches to poverty, to the economy. And so right now with the figure of Trump, it's just become fully transparent because of the person that he is, that he sort of has brought the ethics or morality of the office or politics in general so low, and yet evangelicals have continued to support him. And like one statistic that I cited in my article in that piece in The Guardian was coming from a book by Robert Jones. The book is called The End of White Christian America. And I actually really recommend that book. I've been working through it. And one of the statistics that he shows is that in 2016, white evangelicals went from being the least likely to the most likely group to agree that a candidate's personal immorality or morality has no bearing on their public office performance. And so evangelicals have gone from saying that morality really matters, personal character matters, to the point where they're the group that thinks it doesn't matter. Like more personal morality doesn't matter, character doesn't matter. And so in a sense, it's clear that whatever you think or whatever we think about the religious right project, the political project, in a way, it has really sold its soul, even on its own terms. So this is very important to understand that there's all amounts of critiques that we can mount on on why the religious right is sort of it's a problematic political strategy or project that failed to begin with. But what we're seeing now is that it's starting to really come apart on its own terms. That it was supposed to be a movement that stood for morality, including personal morality, and now it's sort of completely unraveled and shown itself to be maybe what it always has been. I don't know, but at least with Trump, it's really these inner contradictions are coming to light.
Yeah, so I feel like it's interesting to trace some of the stuff about Christianity in America after the Trump election, because immediately after that election, there were a lot of people kind of, racing to see how they could expiate evangelicalism from its support of Donald Trump. So the question was like, well, but what really is an evangelical? Or, not all evangelicals support Donald Trump. There are a lot of progressive evangelicals, etc. But I think, like you're right to note, however we seem to define it, it does seem pretty clear that no matter how you want to put it together, the majority of evangelicals don't seem to be that worried about it. And why do you think that is? Like, is there something just, what's the reactionary politics that evangelicalism is inheriting or carrying on specifically as evangelicalism? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I think that something that part of the problem is not just conservative evangelicalism, but I actually think the issue is really modern Christianity, the way that it's functioned for the past 500 years. I think if we look at it from that vantage point, from a very large, if we zoom out, we will see that Christianity came to the Americas supporting slavery, supporting the appropriation of Native people's lands. It came justifying all sorts of atrocities, and it was very much tied to the white male propertied body. It was tied to a particular kind of ideal of humanity. And so once we get to conservative evangelicalism, and sort of this manifestation, we have to remember that also there were a number of mainliners that also voted for Trump. I don't know what the statistic is, but I was reading one of the last polls about his approval ratings, and there was still a number of mainliners. I think it might have been slightly over 50%, as late as April, that were still approving of his presidency. And so I think the problem is really is tied to Christianity, American Christianity in general. It's not just conservative evangelicalism, but conservative evangelicalism basically highlights or accentuates what is this larger problem. And the larger problem is the way in which Christianity has sided with whiteness and has sided with capital, has sided with this civilizing project. So that it makes to me, from that vantage point, if you think about what Christianity has done for the past hundreds of years, it totally makes sense for Christians to get behind a message that is against foreigners who are brown, who are not white. It makes sense to get behind somebody who is trying to support the wealthiest people and not the most vulnerable. So I think we fool ourselves or we kid ourselves if we think that this is an anomaly or if this is sort of only a problem that's endemic of evangelicalism. With that said, I think evangelicalism is just sort of it's that part of that segment of Christianity which just unabashedly has fully embraced that kind of project in one of its most explicit forms today. And so I don't think it's salvageable. Like, to go to what Dean, what you're saying. I don't think we can go on and on, but I don't think it's a project or it's an idea, no matter how you define it. There's the old definition that was given that evangelicalism is it's four things, that it's basically biblicism, Christocentrism, conversionism, and activism. And I mean, that's one way to define evangelicalism around beliefs. But there are other ways too. You can define it in terms of how it politically rose in the 70s and 80s as a religious right. So whether you look at it sort of sociologically, politically, or in terms of theological beliefs, like this group has basically tried to line up conservative theological beliefs and conservative political activism. And those things have really come together in a way that when you have progressive evangelicals or more moderate evangelicals who disagree, they get shunned and they are very much on the fringe. Like look at somebody like Russell Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention that to me, he's still super conservative, but within evangelicalism, he's more of a moderate because he doesn't think it's like awesome to deport millions of people, and he thinks you shouldn't. He's not a Trump supporter. He's vocally criticized Trump, but then he came under a lot of fire. So even with more moderate evangelicals, you come under fire and you get criticized by what has become this larger consensus.
Cool. Yeah. Man, I think locating that real like colonialist past within evangelicalism and American Christianity at large is like a really helpful move just to kind of understand like where some of this is coming from. That it's not out of nowhere, right? That like that Trump isn't like the root problem. He's kind of like the symptom of the larger issue, kind of spinning and spiraling out of control. And now with Trump, you see it being like way more public, way more obvious. Those things that were maybe more in the dark for a majority of people are now kind of brought to light. And that you said that evangelicalism isn't necessarily salvageable is something that I think resonates with me a lot. It doesn't seem like it's salvageable, and it doesn't seem like it should be something we want to salvage. At the same time, I mean, it has like that terrible history on the back end that we need to bring to light and kind of come to terms with and deal with in some way, and maybe letting it die is that way. But there are people that do find that somehow like good or necessary to salvage it. I was thinking like I don't know, there's like a gazillion Facebook groups about it. I don't know, one that I see one of my friends posting about all the time is called Evangelicals for Social Action, or Evangelicals Against Trump and all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know, what would you say to those people that like those groups that think that there's something worth saving? Like, how would you persuade them otherwise, or like what kind of critique would you give?
Well, I would definitely, I respect their their belief or their commitment to reform evangelicalism and to change it. I have many friends who I think consider themselves evangelical or very much part of that world, and completely hate Trump and hate the direction that the church, their churches are going in. And so it's something that is close to me. And for me, I also I spent a lot of time within evangelicalism. I went to an evangelical school, Calvin College. And even before that, I was what you would call a young, restless, and reformed. It was conservative Calvinist. I was a huge fan of John Piper, was reading John Piper, handing out tracts in high school. And there was I was very much in that orbit. And so I think I can relate to people who are within the larger orbit of evangelicalism and want to change things, and it comes from a good place. For me, I think my judgment or my interpretation comes from the standpoint that I've just seen what has consistently done to people and what it has done politically, and basing my judgment on its actions and its record, I just don't think, and also just demographically, I don't see how it will change. For me, it's very important to have a material analysis as well of evangelicalism. I think that's something for me that's developed much later. I mentioned the definition earlier of evangelicalism based on its beliefs, but there's another analysis to have of its funding streams. How it's funded, it's major institutions, places like Southern Baptist Seminary, the Gospel Coalition, sort of naming major institutions that have a lot of influence and have a lot of money. Grand Rapids is one of those places that it's a sort of a little Christian Mecca, a little part of sort of one of the major cities of American Christendom. And now we have Betsy DeVos, who's Secretary of Education.
Right.
But what's funny is like when I was in Grand Rapids, I knew about the DeVos family and the Prince family, which she's originally from. And, they have close ties to Calvin, and they're very much influential in that whole sort of part of West Michigan and beyond. And now we're seeing at the national level what sort of some major evangelicals, movers, and shakers have been doing behind the scenes for a long time, sort of the politics they espouse, privatization. It also like very much reactionary culturally. Like the latest thing that I heard is that she wants to interview men's rights groups and people who really question campus rape. The campus rape culture, and so this is going to be a step backwards, I think, for higher education, for really for feminism, for inclusion in campuses and higher ed. But these are you have to also keep in mind that these are not just people that are on the fringe or they're sort of on the outskirts of evangelicalism, but some of these people are the biggest bankrollers. They are the funders of evangelical institutions and programs. And so when you have, I think, a material analysis of evangelicalism, it helps to then sort of see, okay, like, how is it actually constrained? Because I know plenty of good people who in evangelical churches or organizations, and they are handcuffed. And they will let me know. They will say, like, I support gay marriage, or I support XYZ issue, but I can't write about it. I can't publicly share it because of the donors So that is part unless that's why I don't see a future for evangelicalism being salvaged or changing course because of just the whole power structure. If you take into account the funding streams, the institutions, and along just with the major grassroots supports, numerically, I think they just outnumber the smaller groups that are more moderate or progressive. And so when you take all that into account, I don't see a future in which the mainstream of evangelicalism will be progressive or will support very progressive policies.
Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned Calvin. I was up there a few weeks ago for a conference that the Consortium for Christian Universities put on. And it all took place in the Prince Conference Center. Which is right next to the DeVos Communication Building. So it was like the most ironic thing, sitting in a room full of CCCU faculty and like administrators, and them telling us about what education is like in 2017, and but no one mentioned that we're sitting in a room named after the Prince family. So it was just like this huge like elephant in the room that I guess they just like couldn't talk about. They felt kind of constrained, I think. There's also, this is unrelated but wild enough, there is a classroom in the DeVos building that's sponsored by Zondervan Publishing, which is just it's okay, talk about a material analysis of evangelicalism. Like, it's all right there in that building. It's like that's who funds it. Zondervan and the DeVos family, it's all them. Well, that's like a pretty helpful way to get started, I guess, talking about this. I wonder though, like, okay, so there's like definitely the material side of evangelicalism. Like, there's lots of money to be made there, and there's lots of money to keep it going. But I wonder, like, for the regular folks that are a part of it, like I had dinner with some friends last night who are extremely evangelical, and like there's something about it that they find valuable, and I don't think it's not something that's necessarily like theologically grounded, but more affective. Like, they find some type of like feeling within evangelicalism that keeps them going back to it. I don't know. So do you think that there is like an affect or desire in evangelicalism that keeps it going for people who aren't necessarily invested in it materially? I don't know. I'm just thinking of like the droves of kids at summer camp who feel compelled to go to altar calls, or people who give like lots of money to evangelical churches for seemingly no material reason. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that there can definitely be multiple factors, and even when I think about my own journey in evangelicalism, I think there's an attraction to a sense of community and to sort of having a coherent worldview that tries to make sense. And obviously I look back and I don't look at the world the same way, but for a certain period in my life, it was something that was a very powerful framework to make sense of the world, about sort of what's wrong with America
Yeah.
and what we need to do. But in that also this emphasis on piety, and this emphasis on relationships and community, and multiplying churches and church planting, and there was some creative impulses there. And so I don't want to write off. I think you're right to point out those things, that those things are real, and it's not to write off any positive experiences or community that people may find, but then the way that things are framed. And then also, like, you have that side of things, sort of the relationships, the community that are the communities that are formed, but then you have the sort of underside, or what the aftermath, when you are deemed to be not of the fold, or when you cross a line. And then, I've had friends call me sometimes and say, hey, I'm just calling you to tell you that I think you're a heretic, and I want to pray for you, and I'm like, oh, I really appreciate, that you care for me so much, that you're thinking of me burning in hell, and you want to talk. But you see what happens, like it sort of, it gets to that point where, and evangelicalism is always, it's written into its DNA that it always has this policing function.
Yeah.
And you just saw that with Eugene Peterson, where Eugene Peterson, who's a very famous author, Christian author, writer of the Message Bible. He came out and in an interview, sort of like, he seemingly he supported gay marriage and everything, but then he stepped back and he backtracked after receiving intense criticism from evangelicals, and specifically, like, I think it was Lifeway Books, the book chain, threatened him. And so that's a perfect picture of sort of like what I'm trying to articulate, in the sense of how the material, a material analysis of sort of the institutions and how evangelicalism works, how it sort of conflates also with the personal experiences, and sort of the way the community is built, and the policing function. Because there you have somebody who's like, everybody loves him, he's really great, he comes out to support a progressive cause or to support gay people, and that, for evangelicalism, that's beyond the pale.
Right.
Even Russell Moore went after him. So
I think calling it a policing function is such a good descriptor, because I think that is part of what people really like about evangelicalism. Is it's a coherent worldview where they can kind of engage in protecting the purity of that worldview against other people. I think that is something that appeals to people. Like for the worse, like it empowers them to say someone else is wrong and to hold like a strong sort of understanding of what's right in opposition, and that's a thing that people like, in my experience.
Yeah, it seems to feed into what's going on in evangelicalism in general in the United States as a policing function, because the right is nothing if not very pro-police. I mean, what passes as the American left is also very pro-police, but in particular, that's what the right's all about: law and order. You gotta make sure everything is ordered properly, and that's a very evangelical kind of thing, or at least it maps pretty comfortably on sort of back and forth. It makes sense. So even if all the moral contradictions and gymnastics are involved, at the end of the day, there's this structural policing principle that kind of makes it easy for them to be bedfellows or something like that.
Yeah, and it's usually what is being, like, when you look at that police function, I guess what I'm calling, I haven't written about this, what I'm calling this police function within evangelicalism, always we have to pay attention to, like, what is being protected, and what is really, what's at stake. And what you notice is that there are a number of things that are not being protected, whether it be immigrants or like women's rights and other things. But like there are certain lines that have been drawn, and the more that you look at, you see that it's highly racialized, it's highly gendered, it's very much also capitalist. It's sort of tied to a certain idea of economy. And so you can't be a socialist, you can't be a feminist, you can't be gay, and I think and be an evangelical.
Well, maybe one thing we could do is like evangelicalism, bad news on the whole. I think maybe not everyone wants to put it that strongly, but it feels like right now, as it's presently manifested in the U.S., demographically, evangelicalism seems to be a force for the worse, I guess. And not just evangelicalism, like even my own tradition, the Catholic Church, was very ambivalent, like surprisingly ambivalent about Donald Trump. Like even our bishops are sort of hit or miss. Like some of them are good.
We need Pope Francis to make more appointments and to make them very quickly. Before, as
Yeah,
long
that's
as
right.
like I don't know how many years he has left, but he needs to make all those appointments really fast.
Yeah, I know, I hear you. But the worst part of it is, even when the bishops are saying something, American Catholicism doesn't follow its bishops very closely. It's not like other parts of the world. They've consistently, to their credit, been coming out against all the Republican healthcare reforms, like almost unanimously as a group. Even the most conservative bishops are willing to go that far with it. And it's like, well, that doesn't seem to be reflected in the pews. So I don't know. There's something very, very bad about Christianity in general, as opposed to not just evangelicals in America. But all that being said, I want to talk a little bit about the work that you've done, Daniel, to kind of make a contribution to pushing Christianity further left in the U.S. and, working out what that might mean. So you've got a couple of pieces scattered around the internet where you do a good job at this, I think. There's all this talk about the religious left or building a religious left. And I find that somewhat encouraging, but also like very troubling, specifically because what people often mean when they talk about a religious left is specifically Christians and specifically the Democratic Party. So you wrote a pretty good piece a while back talking about how the Democratic Party isn't the party of God, which I think is like exactly how it should be said.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about that? Like, obviously we super agree the Democratic Party is not the party of God. But what compelled you to say that, and why do you think it needs to be said?
Yeah, so that I wrote that piece in Religion Dispatches, and that was during the primaries when Hillary was running versus Bernie, and there was a lot of talk about and there's still a lot of debate about the place for religion and Christianity in the Democratic Party, and sort of if there is this powerful religious right and this powerful evangelical bloc that is supporting Trump, where are the progressive, Christians and progressive religious folks? I think that something that I try to point out is there's a lot of problems to talking about the religious left or the Christian left. And part of it is because the term becomes incoherent when people try to use it in a way that is an alternative, or sort of, it's a mirror of the religious right itself. So people imagine, people see there's a religious right, and then they try to imagine, well, there has to be an equal and opposite force called the religious left. And so if there's a force that is sort of unified around like issues like abortion and prayers in school, and they support Republicans, and there's this other group that is like all pro-choice and all for like secularism and all for it's good. And what you realize is that actually the mainline Protestants and folks that I guess would consider themselves religious liberal are not as unified politically around sort of a project in the way that the religious right is. Historians can probably, write. They need to write books, because I've been looking and haven't been finding anything. They need to write books about what, why is it what is that difference? Why is it that the religious left or these progressive groups haven't sort of coalesced in the way? I think there's different factors. I think one has to be with the numbers, which I mentioned. There just aren't as many. But the other thing has to do with the meaning of the word left and progressive. So part of the problem is, like, when people talk about religious liberals or progressives, they usually mean anybody who's not a Republican. And so de facto, it's like, oh, you're a Democrat. Like that's what it must mean. When in reality, like when I think of a religious left or a Christian left, like, and I think what's needed is actually a coherent political strategy and kind of commitments. And what I would call leftist commitments to a certain vision of the economy, a certain vision of democracy, a certain vision of rights. And so the problem is that when people think of the left, it's also, people conflate two different things. They conflate religious liberalism with political liberalism, or like, and you can see how this is so confusing, because like in a way, to be politically liberal is to be in the popular terminology that we use in American to be conservative, because like if you're actually classically liberal, that means you're like capitalist, and that would be you're super and so you would be conservative. You would be both the Republican and Democratic Party. But if you look back, like somebody like say like if you look at a situation like in Germany, Karl Barth, who's a very famous Swiss Reform theologian, he vehemently opposed his liberal professors. And these were professors who were theologically liberal in Germany, that were known for kind of higher criticism of the Bible, etc., and sort of historical takes on the life of Jesus. And he came into sharp disagreement over the war, over World War I, and then over what eventually became the Reich Church. And there you have plenty of religious, I guess what you could call theological liberals, or Christian liberals, but they were like also Nazis. So they're like, they could talk to you about higher criticism, and they could talk to you about what they thought about Jewish people. And it's like, okay, and that goes to show you how incoherent the term becomes, because like people conflate theological liberalism with political liberalisms or with political leftism. And I think that we need to sort of disentangle all of that and to realize, okay, you can actually have a number of theological beliefs and they can be wedded to also a number of political projects. Like there are some more conservative theological folks, and I think Pope Francis is one of them, who I think is more left on economic issues than a lot of Christians here in the States.
Yeah, that's right.
And so I think that's why there's such a problem with writing about and thinking about the religious left, is that we try to imagine it as this equal and opposite force to what the religious right is. And it never was that. And then it's also clouds like how we think about politics.
That's an incredibly well put statement, I think. A minute ago, though, you were saying that like there's no one like articulating these like sort of Christian left ideas about economics, or I don't know, any other sort of political issue. I wonder, like, how would you suggest Christians start articulating those things? Or like, I mean, do you want to write a manifesto? Will you write a manifesto that kind of lays these things out for us? I don't know. How can we start to have these conversations about what like a Christian left politics looks like in terms and like in conjunction with a left theology or something?
Yeah, and I think I also want to be careful and not say that there isn't any. There are definitely lots of people I think thinking about and even writing about the relationship between Christianity and the left and left politics. I think what I was trying to say, and I probably exaggerated my point, is that there needs to be a historical accounting of how the power dynamic between the religious right and progressive Christians or liberal Christians, and why is it that this group sort of became so much more powerful. I think that some people have alluded to it, but when you look up books, like there's a ton of books on the religious right and the rise of like fundamentalism or evangelicalism, the moral majority. There's a lot of research out there. There's a lot of articles, and I think there's a lot of people talking about the religious left. When you actually look for research on like what does that mean, then you realize like it becomes incoherent, because like there isn't this phenomena. But there are, and also clarify, there are scholars and there are practitioners and there are people who I think are thinking about Christianity and progressive and left politics. Like one example that I'll give is Heath Carter, who he wrote this book called Union Made, which I just finished reading not too long ago. And it's a fantastic book. It's about basically late 19th, early 20th century Christians in Chicago responding to sort of the rise of the Gilded Age, and responding to industrialization. And what he tries to show is that before you had the social gospel, which was sort of, I guess, if the United States had a Christian left, if it's ever had a Christian left, I think the social gospel, and I put King in that group too. Interesting. I put Martin Luther King Jr. within that group of sort of as an extension of the social gospel, and a variation, but also as part of that group. That group was the Christian left. But I think what Heath Carter tries to show is that before we get somebody like Walter Rauschenbusch and we get sort of institutionalized forms of the social gospel, there were grassroots Christians, and some of them not even fully, they're not like, I guess what you call Orthodox Christians. They were heterodox. They believed that they weren't necessarily tied to an institutional church. There were a lot of workers in Chicago who were really agitated, who were very much trying to call out the church for the way that it had wedded itself to capital, to the way that has wedded itself to wealth, and it's just fascinating. So like I think there's stuff out there. I mean, somebody else that I've been reading about is Norman Thomas. Norman Thomas was one of the presidential candidates for the Socialist Party of America multiple times. He was kind of the successor to Eugene Debs, who's one of the most famous socialists in the United States. And he was a Presbyterian minister for a long time in New York City, specifically East Harlem. And Martin Luther King Jr. called him the bravest man that I ever met. He actually wrote an article, "The Bravest Man That I Ever Met." So there actually is a tradition, I would say. There is a tradition of Christians who are left. But it hasn't been written about as much. I don't think it's been covered as much. I'm thinking about, Heath Carter's one person, Gary Dorian, who teaches at Union, I think is somebody else who really covers liberal Protestantism and the social gospel really well. But yeah, there needs to be more, I think, coverage of sort of these figures, because I think most, like, if you speak to the average Christian, they don't even know that there used to be a considerable amount of Christian socialists in this country.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. It's crazy, too. In the Catholic Church, we have a kind of weird relationship to the left around the whole world, but in the United States especially, because what you get is either Catholics that are like very performatively loud, like the Berrigan brothers or something, running around protesting the war and like spilling their blood all over weapons and stuff, and like that is very cool. But it's not tied to any kind of real like on the ground party movement. Like that works if you're like a crazy awesome like Jesuit priest or something, but if you're like a normal average person, probably you're not gonna like break into Vietnam draft records and like burn them with homemade napalm in the street. Like that's not a thing that's on your radar, but maybe you would like think about joining a party or something. It's funny because I always think of one of my favorite examples to articulate how weird the Christian left is this woman named Diane Drufenbrock. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but she was a Catholic nun. She died, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. But she was the vice presidential candidate for the Socialist Party in the United States a long time ago. But she was a nun, which is so crazy and awesome. And it's like, how do people not know that there was a nun who ran as the vice presidential nominee of the Socialist Party USA? So yeah, I think you're right that I think a lot of it probably has to do with just total underexposure. Like everybody's obsessed with articulating the conditions for the rise of these reactionary politics, and that's like important work. But it would really help to get some good press for like what has already happened, so we don't have to like reinvent the wheel or feel like we're reinventing the wheel or ask these questions of like where's the religious left, because if you talk to like any old Catholics who like lived through the 60s in the US or Canada, like the religious left is there. They're all just like very old and very smart. So
yeah, there's definitely that's the thing. If you look at the history of the United States and even Canada, I think there are examples of Christians with leftist commitments and who are involved in the civil rights movement, who are involved in anti-war activism. You think of many figures. I mean, some of the most famous that people talk about and read about, like Martin Luther King Jr., Dorothy Day. The issue is that I think, and this is something that I've written about, I think that a certain kind of political realism has plagued the liberal Christians or left-leaning Christians in the U.S., broadly speaking. And so that realism, that political realism allows them to, they can quote King, they can quote Dorothy Day, they can quote maybe they can even quote the Berrigan brothers, but they cannot sort of commit themselves to thinking that kind of politics is viable or possible today. They don't think that a commitment to socialism or a commitment to peace, like that. It's just not. They're like, they don't think it works. There's a certain kind of political realism that has taken a really strong hold within Christians' imagination, and so I think there's a lot of people who say, like, I believe all that stuff. It's great. Like, I believe that they can affirm peace, they can affirm better economics. But when it comes to actual electoral politics, or when it comes to political figures and politics, like they think like they take a more centrist standpoint.
Yeah, you wrote a little bit about that in a column about Barack Obama's political imagination, and I thought that was very well done. You traced it to Niebuhr, one of the sort of political and theological realists par excellence, I guess, on purpose. Like, he's no secrets about it. That's what he thinks you ought to do and think, etc. And in that article, you juxtaposed Obama's political theology with both Martin Luther King Jr. and then also James Cone, who you spent a lot of time reading and promoting, etc. What do you think, like, for Christians, as we're trying to retrain our theological imaginations or figure out, how can we start building a left, not just through historical figures, which is very important, but also through, our dispositions toward politics and toward each other and toward the church? What do you think we should do? Like, are there particular people that are really helpful to read? Are there particular, untapped or underexplored territories of theology that we need to keep pressing and looking at? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to changing Christians' political imagination, the first thing is to, I think, expose and show the ways in which certain political leaders have really constrained what we think is possible. That they have told us, for a long time, they've told us that, like, another kind of world is not possible, and sort of they've given Christians a box. They've given even progressive Christians, like, this is the box that you can work in. And what that has usually meant it's been that things can't really change politically, that we can't really change the economy, and most of what we can do is maybe wish for more inclusion and maybe wish for more representation at the top. But this system of inequality, this war machine that we have in the United States, that's just the way it is, and the best that we can do is sort of tinker with it and avoid its worst excess. I think where we begin is by first showing people that is a lie, and that's actually not working, that way of thinking, like, not only is it not helpful for the construction of a better type of world, but it's actually not even practically feasible anymore, because it's not winning. You can't win elections. You can't build a broad base of people who want to support you if you keep your main message is that, hey, like, I know the world sucks, but, like, I'm not as bad as the next guy. I'm not as bad as Trump. We're not as bad as Trump. Like, you are not going to win something. So I think that's the first thing. And I think the other thing is just realizing the way that if you actually look at the Christian faith, like, if you look at, like, a concept like the kingdom of God, like, it requires you to think that there is another kind of world that's possible. You can't say, like, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You can't truly, we pray that. That's part of, the Lord's Prayer that Christians pray. But you can't really believe that unless you actually believe that there can be another world, political world as well. I think beyond that, in terms of not just historical figures or, like, thinking theologically or biblically, I think there are certain people today that are working. I think two people that come to mind are Reverend Barber and Linda Sarsour. And Reverend Barber, and I've gotten to sort of see both of them in different settings, and they, I think, are very amazing leaders. Like Reverend Barber, he used to be leader of the NAACP in North Carolina, and he started the Moral Mondays movement to really push back against really draconian policies being put by the Republican legislature over there in the state. But he is somebody that has come out, and I think he's the closest embodiment that we have on someone who has a really high profile, of someone who is truly, I think, left and progressive and embodies the spirit of King. And I think with that, like, I mentioned Linda Sarsour because I think she also represents the future of what that the future of, I think, of a Christian left, it cannot be monolithic. Like we will have to work with people who are not Christian, and it's not going to be like we can't replicate the mistake, or we can't repeat the mistakes of the Christian right, which is to think that we think that solely on Christian terms we can solve problems, or solely on Christian terms like we can actually like make sense of this country. Like, hello, like this country is not it's not going to be majority Christian anymore. That's part of Robert Jones's book, his thesis that he shows, his research, and so like the future of any Christian left will have to be pluralistic. It will have to be interfaith. It will have to work with leaders of various movements. And so that's why I look at somebody like Reverend Barber and Linda Sarsour, and I think these are the types of leaders that I think they're actually pushing against the Democratic Party. They're pushing against what political leaders have told religious leaders is like, this is what's possible. This is how much we can change. And they are starting to put the heat on and the pressure on the people who consider themselves politically liberal.
That reminds me of, I guess, a different point that means the same thing, I guess. There's a Latin American philosopher named Santiago Castro Gomez, and he's like one of the decolonial guys, and I read one article by him, so I'm not like an expert or anything. Anyways, he has this really cool critique, I think, against like people in the West, I guess, just generally, that they think from like a 0 point. They think that like, their perspective is sort of like the groundwork for everything. Like they're starting off from like a point of objectivity, whereas the rest of the world is coming at it from a different lens or whatever. What's interesting about the 0 point thing, though, is he introduces this idea of plurality of knowledges into the equation, where it's like actually like, you don't have the 0 point and you have to start listening to other people. And I think that taking like that kind of idea with what you just said and what we know about the future of America, like in your I think in your last article you said by 2024 or something, like white evangelicals won't be a majority. So figuring out how to start listening to other people that aren't just Christian and aren't just American, aren't just like, from the United States or from North America, is going to be huge in like building those future like left coalitions to think of another world that could be possible. Plural worlds, plural understandings of politics.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. That like it may actually it may make us like ask the question: if we need a Christian left, what kind of left is it going to be? Is it going to kind of be this 0 point Christian? It's going to be a mirror image of the Christian right, where it's this sort of totalizing project. And I think that's why when I speak of the Christian left, I think it's a much more, I don't know, I think it's a much more humble project, because like there can't be this assumption that we're going to take power, we're going to take control of like the country, we're going to make it like what, Christian left again? Like, no, like it's not, that's why it's not the same as it can't, it's totally different terms. And so I think part of it will be having to work and partner with other people and different perspectives. And that's why I also think the same thing with socialism. I think with the politics side of it is that I'm a big, the sort of the camp that I fall in is I really think that any true socialism needs to be democratic. It needs to come from the people, and it needs to sort of it can't be sort of a kind of socialism or progressive politics that just simply imposed uniformly on a large group of people who don't want it or who like have different viewpoints. I think that a true socialism has to take into account different cultures, different viewpoints, different religions, different things. And I think what brings us together is that we all live on this planet together, and we need water, and we need land to live. We live on land. We drink water. We breathe the same air. We go to school, and so there are certain needs, basic necessities that we have as human beings that I think we can come to sort of a general consensus that okay, we need to work for something together that makes sense. But in terms of then how that is how that's worked out culturally, or how that's worked out then in specific instances, I think people need to have input. It can't be sort of one thing. And so in that sense, like that's how I think of myself as a democratic socialist.
On that point, I don't know if you want to talk about this, and if you don't, it's totally cool. But thinking about like, the future of the left in America and a possible Christian left, and then also what you just said about about democratic socialism. Do you have anything you want to say about like socialist organizations that you want to work with or think that are like promising? Like, are you a DSA member? Are you a member of some other party? If you don't want to do this, it's cool, but
no, yeah, and this is fine. I'm a at-large member of DSA, and so I just went to an initial meeting with a new chapter that is starting on Long Island, and so I'm hoping that it looks like it's going in a good direction. I hope to get more involved. I think DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, I think it's a good organization. They're at least the biggest, like the fastest growing socialist organization. What people don't know, and this may interest folks who are listening to this podcast, is that DSA actually has some deep religious roots, or at least like interactions with religion. And so Michael Harrington, who's the founder, one of the founders of DSA, he worked with, I think, with King's the Poor People's Campaign. There was some interaction there, and then Norman Thomas, who I mentioned before, he was part of a previous group that I think was eventually subsumed under DSA, but he was part of the Socialist Party of America. And then Cornel West is one of the honorary chairs. So at least like in terms of its like genetic legacy, DSA has compared to, I guess, other leftist group, has been more open to religion, which is not something that all leftist or socialist groups are. If you take a super, I guess, orthodox Marxist approach, then like they tend to be very much more suspicious and not as open to people who are religious, I think, being socialist. But at least in DSA's DNA, they've been much more open. So I think that organization, it's growing. I think it has some promise, and I think that because of its openness to religion, like that's a big potential. That's a big sort of it's an area in which they have the potential to grow because of the number of progressive Christians and religious folks who are wanting to actually get politically involved and do things. Another group that I would suggest, or that I would recommend checking out, is Reparations of the Breach. And that is Reverend Barber's, I think that's his national organization, I think with also some other ministers. And those are people who I think are really, they're putting the heat on the Republicans and the Democratic Party for not being committed to policies that produce life holistically in terms of like healthcare, in terms of poverty, like, and they have I think it's a very clear and a strong commitment. Somebody else, Reverend Tracy Blackman, who's with the UCC, the United Church of Christ. She's somebody that like recently, I think she was outside of Mitch McConnell's office and was like, "You worship the God of capitalism."
Yeah. And he was like, "Yes, I do. In fact, I'm going to the temple right now."
So yeah, I think, that was awesome, and I think we need more people to be saying these types of things, but that I think these are circles in which Christians can probably connect to other folks that are doing this type of work, and we need people to also say that to the Democratic Party as well. I think it's very, very important. I am not a purist in the sense that like I may hate the Democratic Party, but like, given what the scenario is in terms of like what are the electoral conditions right now, and how can you win, it's very hard for third parties to win or for independents to win. And so I think we definitely have to have like a multi-pronged approach where even if I think the Democratic Party is hopeless, which I think it basically is, I have to hold out hope that, okay, maybe there's one candidate that I can support, or I can support a grassroots insurgents that wants to sort of take it over and change it. I also support those on the outside who are just doing non-electoral work and activism. I think that's also major key.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I appreciate that you have done a good job just in your response, like drawing together a variety of organizations that aren't explicitly like left, but also not explicitly not left or something. It's like there's a lot of different fronts on which the struggle for liberation is taking place. And yeah, I think it's very important to kind of, I don't know, ward off those siloing tendencies that, well, at least that I definitely have on the left, to be like, oh, these people don't care about private property, so I guess they're garbage. Like, I'm not interested. Like, I don't know, maybe whatever. If someone wants to get rid of prisons and they like aren't worried about private property, that's fine, I guess. Yeah, so I appreciate that corrective. Yeah, I was thinking also, so against my better judgment, I argue a lot on the internet with like radical traditional Catholics. Radical in the negative sense, like they're, I don't know.
Rad trads.
Whatever.
Like
Yeah,
radical
rad.
orthodoxy or...
Like worse than that.
But it's weird because a lot of them take themselves to be on the Christian left or whatever, because the whole shtick is that they're trying to follow Catholic social teaching to the letter. And, surprise, Catholic social teaching is not the party documents of the Democratic Party. So they're like, well, we must be on the left. But the weird thing about that is they're so allergic to any actual leftist group or organization or people in general. It's the strangest thing, and it all hinges on this this idea that if you're not absolutely Christian on every single score, then, we're not going to get ourselves dirty by, like, hanging out with you and doing whatever we're going to do. And so, I mean, on the bright side, there are so few of them that they'll never do anything in this world, because there's, like, 10 of them on the internet arguing with each other and with me, apparently. But on the downside, I think that actually exhibits the extreme form of politics a lot of Christians implicitly have, that we've been kind of dancing around in this whole conversation about, having this anxiety about really building the coalitions you would have to build, which means... finding people who are friendly to Christians, which is one thing that Matt and I are trying to do here, talking to people from the PSL and the DSA, etc. And then on the other hand, like, not worrying about whether or not people care that you're a Christian, and just sort of, getting involved because you should.
Yeah. I think that in terms of, oh, sorry, I don't know if you have a question from that.
No, it was just a thing that if it sparks something for you, go for it. If it doesn't, then leave it on the table.
No, I don't know too. I'm not as familiar with this part. Is going to be cut out. I don't know as much about those Catholic groups. So, but I'm sorry that you have to debate.
I don't have to, and no one should feel sorry for me. It's complete masochism. Yeah, I know that I'm an addict because, like, I say that I could stop at any time, but I don't. So.
Oh, I think I have a response. So maybe you can include this. Yeah, I think that just reflects the problem of, like, we have to work with a lot of people. You have to build a really broad coalition. Obviously, I think it's important to know what your own commitments are and what you're not willing to compromise, and that's the problem with the Democratic Party, that it stands for everything and nothing at the same time. It sort of like it assumed that demographically it was going to automatically win just like this large coalition of like capitalists, people of color, queer people, Southern worker. Like, it was just going to kind of win all these people except like the Republican base. But it actually didn't. Because like the thing is, if you don't actually stand for something, you don't, then people start to not really trust you. So there's this balance. There's this balance that needs to take place between building a broad coalition, but having certain commitments that you are going to take strong stands for. You're not going to walk away from. I think the new Labor Party, or I shouldn't say the new Labor Party, because that has its own historical baggage. The Labor Party under Jeremy Corbyn, I think, is a good example of a political group, of a political party that has taken a good direction. And remember that Jeremy Corbyn, the only reason why he's now the leader of the party is because I think they opened up their party for members to have more of a say in terms of who the leader is. If it was up to most of the MPs and the leadership of the Labour Party itself, they would have had somebody like in the Tony Blair camp to still be heading it. And that would have been disastrous. And so, like, that organization, that political party has taken a really, really good direction. But it took a lot of efforts from the bottom up, in terms of people changing that. And so I think here, with any party or with any political organization, with any group, like, it will have to take sort of a very deep democracy and push from the bottom for it to change.
Go figure. Like, people actually want to make their lives better and like will vote for it. Like, how surprising.
So in our last episode with Drew, we were talking a little bit about the challenges of building a coalition on the left, within the left. So it's a problem, for for Christians, but it's also a problem for the left that's trying to kind of build itself this year, and especially, in the wake of Donald Trump. And one thing that we kind of were batting back and forth was like, there seems to be a real confusion about where... like trying to name a primary site of struggle on the one hand, that's what some people want to do, and then emphasizing the need to kind of come at a variety of issues from a variety of angles, and not having the need to name that primary site of struggle. So the big sort of stage on which this is playing out, I think, is with publications like Jacobin, right? Which is easy to pick on because they've basically made it explicit that they're like, we think that class is the thing. That's the thing. Sorry, like, all the rest of the things are important things, but they're epiphenomena of class, and that's what we think is the most effective strategy, which I find so absurd and like very hard to to stomach. And it seems to me like it's a real challenge for the left moving forward, of like, is the left going to be capable of taking up these other kinds of struggles and not sidelining them in the interest of class or something like that? So what do you think? Like, it seems to me, based on the first half of our conversation, evangelicalism and just Christianity in general has a race problem in the U.S. That's motivating all these politics of resentment. But also the left has a race problem, that it's kind of blind to some of the issues that are being challenged in this political climate. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that the left definitely have, broadly speaking, there is a race problem, but I have to be careful here because the center also has a race problem. I think everybody has everybody has a problem. What's happening is that I think what we need is basically a true intersectional approach, in the way that Kimberly Crenshaw and other Black feminist writers have been talking about for decades. The problem is that language, or that sort of the idea of intersectionality, has been co-opted by neoliberals who use the idea of diversity to basically, to argue that the issue is basically representation, and it's not like the economy, or it's like not, elitism, or sort of, it's not. And so, because certain groups have co-opted that language, and then now you have leftists who sort of react to that and say, well, the problem is identity politics. Like, the problem is intersectionality. Like, what we need is to go back to focusing on the true issue, which is class and which is capitalism, and not get confused, and just understand that these issues of diversity or sexuality or others are just like all stemming from. And I think that, for me, that's my thinking of it. That's my approach. Like, in short, I think that we need to listen to Black feminists. I just think we need to read them and listen to them. And I think, for me, I've been critical of the language of intersectionality more in the way that it's been co-opted, but I don't think in the way that it's actually, if you look at the way it was initially articulated. And if you think of people like somebody like Angela Davis, like, I mean, these are Black feminists who, Black feminist thinkers who are intersectional, but also anti-capitalist, explicitly anti-capitalist, involved in activism throughout her life, imprisoned, all sorts of stuff. And so I think there are ways to sort of cut through it, but right now I think we're almost stuck within these two very sort of unfortunate routes, which I think are not helping us when it comes to like race on the left. And so for me, there needs to be a way to understand that people from other cultures and from different countries, people who are not white and who are not European, will bring perspectives that might be slightly different than Marx. So I think this is the important thing about Marx. I think it's important to have an open kind of Marxism and a heterodox kind of form of Marxism, in which like there are certain things that are true because capital has expanded and has sort of gone global. there are certain realities that are true everywhere or are becoming true everywhere. But then that doesn't mean at the same time that everything is sort of can be collapsed to this sort of universal notion of class without attending to sort of this particular context, like the local struggles, the local cultures. And also even when it comes to thinking about the future, for example, like think about the Zapatistas in Mexico, like they want a particular kind of future. When you look at other Marxist-Leninist groups, like it doesn't look like what the Zapatistas are doing. They're doing something a little bit different. So for me, like it's important to understand that the endpoint, we can have multiple futures. It's sort of what Matt was saying before, right? Like another world is possible, like another world, like other worlds are possible. So I think when it comes to the issue of race, that's part of the issue, is that there's this desire to limit and to control sort of to control the analysis to what goes in. And it just needs to be a lot less Eurocentric, I think, in its approach. Yeah.
Well, Daniel, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. Yeah, like when we were thinking about doing this podcast, you were one of the people on our first list. I was like, we've got to find a way to get Daniel on here at some point. And I'm really glad. I know you've had like a crazy summer full of a lot of stuff happening. So it means a lot that you carved out some time to chat with us. I wanted to say, I was thinking about where I first knew you, and I think I remember the first time I met you was coincidentally at Calvin College. I was there for the book release of the like Shane Claiborne Common Prayer book thing. And you were like the only person that talked to us for a significant amount of time. So we were visitors from Cornerstone, the more evangelical school in Grand Rapids than Calvin. So that's like a very funny origin.
It's so embarrassing to tell me I met you at a Shane Claiborne documentary.
I know. I feel the same way. That's why I bring it up. It's like it's a very good like preface actually to this whole conversation. I should have said at the beginning, but yeah. So no,
that's like
thanks
the
for
most 2010s Christian thing to do. Yeah. I was at a Shane Claiborne book release, and
I remember Dean. I remember I went to talk to Dean because I heard that there was this group of sort of dissident philosophy students at Cornerstone. Wait, it's a Cornerstone, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Right, and it was like a dissident group of like philosophy students at Cornerstone, and there were like some of them were thinking of maybe transferring, or they were causing a lot of issues for the school. But there was this guy named Bonzo who I think was like radicalizing you guys. So like for me, I was a philosophy major at Calvin, and I just wanted to be in solidarity with the other students who are also suffering. I'm like we should maybe form like an international, like a small. Well, it's not really international. It's a Grand Rapids international of philosophy dissident students under Christian philosophy rule.
Yeah, the solidarity continues for sure.
Maybe that's a good place to end. Did you get that in the recording?
Yeah. It's all there, man. We got it.
Yeah, but yeah, thank you guys. I had a great time.
Yeah, me too. This is good.
Yeah, good luck in Long Island. Look forward to more of your writing.
Yeah,
thank you,
sure.
thank you. Yeah, and I hope this is not my last visit.
No way, we'll have you back for sure.
Yeah, anytime you want, man. Thanks for listening to Magnificast. Super cool to have Daniel Camacho on. That was definitely a highlight of the podcast experience for us. Next week, Matt Sitman's going to be on talking about, I think, a lot of similar themes, but like different because he's a different person. That's the thing about people, is that they're not the same. If you
some communist you are, am I right?
Yeah, that's right. We're also still doing the Virilio reading group. We had the first meeting last week, and it was really fun and good, and like 5 or 6 people joined the conversation, and it was really good. I don't know. I liked what happened. If you want to get in on it, you still can. Just give us $1 on Patreon, and all of our Virilio expertise can be yours.
That's all it's worth, actually.
It's actually
one American dollar.
$1 American dollar, yeah. Not Canadian dollar. Oof. All right, thanks for listening. Good. All right, I'm gonna stop recording.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.